It's wonderful to see you with us, and a very special welcome to Dayan Binstock. We're very, very grateful for your time this evening. For those who don't know, Dayan Binstock is a Dayan on the London Davening, as well as being the senior Rav of St. John's Wood Shul. To be a rabbi and chazan is quite common, but to be a rabbi and a Dayan, to manage the rigors of Shul life and Davening life is very much unique, I think, as far as I know in this country. So it's a great honor and a privilege for you to be with us. When the chief rabbi needs guidance written on the challenges of davening in these difficult times, he turned to Dayan Binstock, whose guidance has been constantly requested, I know, amongst Rabbonim, to be shared so that we know what to say, what not to say. But that's mostly about Shul. Many people will also be unable to come to Shul and will have to be davening at home. So further questions are raised as to how one can best go about doing that. So Dayan Binstock has very kindly agreed to share with us some thoughts on the davening, some thoughts on davening at home, and please God, he will be available also to take some questions. So if you have a question, if it's a question you already have in advance, you can send it to me on the chat. Or if not, we can use the raise hand function, and hopefully we'll be able to take some questions at the end. So please, without further ado, hand over to Dayan Binstock.
Thank you, Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Feigelman. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. And looking at your program, you've organized something very exciting over the next few days. So kol hakavod to you for what you and the community are doing. I, of course, have very fond connections with the Liverpool community. I see my cousin Ruthie Raisman on the Zoom, and my father grew up. Oliver Sholem grew up in Liverpool. So, as I say, I have very, very fond connections with family members and friends in the Liverpool community. So, very pleased to be able to participate in your program this evening. What I'd like to do, as Rabbi Feigelman said, is speak a bit about the challenges of davening at home on Rosh Hashanah. And then, of course, any questions you have, we can deal with, and we can try and address those issues, as they say, from your particular perspective. And so we are, of course, in challenging times. And let me begin with a well-known story. I'm sure it's a story that you know, but it just, as it were, leads us in the direction where we want to head. And so there's a story of a young, ignorant shepherd who is all he's doing. He's Jewish, but he's out with looking after the sheep. He's never had a Jewish education. And, he's brought to the big town for Rosh Hashanah, and is there sort of around him. People are praying, and it's impressive, but it's very boring for him. He's just not getting anything out of it at that particular stage. And it's going on, and he hears the sound of the shofar, and he finds that very inspiring. And but he, of course, is not able to pray. He's not got any words he can utter. And at the end of the service, he just feels he wants to express himself in some way. And he realizes he's got in his pocket his shepherd's whistle. And he takes it out and he blows his whistles as his own expression of what this place is all about. And of course, everyone around him, what's this boy? What's he doing? Blowing this whistle in the middle of on Rosh Hashanah? And they're about to throw him out of the shul. And the rabbi comes and says, no. This young man, with his sincerity and blowing his whistle, has achieved more than many of us in the synagogue today, because it really was a cry from the heart which he expressed it in that way. Now, it's a story that I'm sure many, if not all of you know, pointing to the sort of the importance of sincerity in prayer and so on. But it does express a certain key idea of Rosh Hashanah, in that, of course, the key mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is the blowing of the shofar. And this year, of course, since Shabbos is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we're not going to be able to blow the shofar, we'll just blow it on the second day. But the shofar is that primal cry without words that expresses a person wanting to be able to allow their prayers to go up to God, but they're not able to formulate them in a proper way. And just like a mother can understand the cry of her baby, even though the baby's not formulated the words, is it Is he thirsty? Is she hungry? Is she tired? Does he need a nappy changing? So a mother can recognize what the cry represents, even though the cry doesn't have any words. And so the primal cry of the shofar represents our just wanting to express ourselves in that inarticulate way. And we hope God will understand and translate that into actions, into comprehension as to what our thoughts and deepest desires are. So that's the basic story of the shofar, which I'm sure many of you know. There's a sort of another version of that story which goes along the following lines. So there's this boy, the shepherd boy, who's in Shul on Rosh Hashanah, and of course he hears all the sounds around him, and he's overwhelmed, and he takes out his whistle and blows it, and the rabbi comes, "You can't do that in here, we'll throw you out if you continue to do that." He says, "But in the story, you're supposed to say, what a wonderful thing I did, and how my whistling was better than anyone else's prayers." So the rabbi, "But from you, we expect more." So it really depends who you are and where you are. Are we achieving going for a minimum, or are we going for a maximum? And do we want to be the boy who can only express himself just with the whistle? Or are we going to try and use what resources we have to try and get more out of what Rosh Hashanah does for us and can be for us, not just simply blowing a whistle? And so we need to ask ourselves, well, what do we normally do? What are we required to do? And what would be best for us to do? Now, some of you may be regular synagogue attendants, and you're normally in Shul every Rosh Hashanah, and please God, you may be there this Rosh Hashanah. Some of you, particularly, I suppose, those who are connecting with this program this evening, maybe not be able to get to Shul for whatever reason. There may not be services available for you for whatever the case may be, and you may be stuck at home one or both days of Rosh Hashanah. And so, and you may be the sort of person that knows how to daven, or you may be a person that really just pops in for a bit on Rosh Hashanah. You're more inspired by the music, the atmosphere, rather than really what the details of the prayers are. So I want to be able to express and try and explore the situation for all kinds, as it were, and of course deal with any detailed questions that you may have at some stage later. Now, it's so important to have a good machzor, and I can't recommend strongly enough the Koran machzor that has this beautiful, gracious, elegant translation by Rabbi Lord Sachs with lots of very fine and insightful explanations that he has. But there are other machzors that you may be more comfortable with, whether it's a Birnbaum machzor or the Art Scroll machzor. There is the classic Routledge machzor, but the translation, I mean, unless you have an appreciation for Victorian English, it won't really relate to you today, as it were. So do have a machzor that's going to help you, at least if you're going to read the prayers in English, to be able to understand and comprehend what's going on. And of course, there's plenty of other reading material. Koran, who produced this Koran machzor, if you send them an email, they will send you an 85-page download of articles that will help you over Rosh Hashanah from Rabbi Sachs and other rabbis and thinkers, both men and women. That will be a very valuable guide to Rosh Hashanah, whether you're at Shul or you're at home. And I would so strongly recommend you making use of it. If you need any further details, contact Rabbi Feigerman and I will liaise with him to give you all that information. So that's certainly something very helpful. So if you're davening at home, so there we need some preliminaries. It's good to do so at the same time that your shul is going to be davening, because it means that even if you can't be in the same place, you can be at the same time. And that's very good to be able to synchronize your prayers with the community. If for whatever reason that doesn't work because you're tied up with something else, doesn't matter. If it is possible, then ideally that's the nicest and best thing to be able to do, to synchronize your prayers with that of the community. If you're davening at home, do so in a place that's conducive to prayer. In other words, choose a place that's clean, and if it's possible to do so, facing a wall that's not going to give you any distractions. There may be things that are going to inspire you, but you don't want to be distracted away from your prayers. And, a nearby bathroom or toilet door should be closed. Again, you want to have the right sort of atmosphere that's appropriate for prayer. Ideally, your prayers should be in the direction of Israel. So east, southeast, as it were, should be the place. And if you're davening at home, you should dress for davening as well. You should dress appropriately, ideally as you would do it in Shul, because it will give you the right sort of, as it were, accoutrements to enable you to be in the right mood for prayer. Just simply to turn up in your pajamas, just open the machzor, that's not appropriate. So dress appropriately for your prayer as well, and that will help you create the right sort of mood for prayer. Now, the next question is, how much time are you going to have? Maybe you're by yourself and you've got as much time you need. Maybe you're looking after kids. Maybe you're looking after someone who's unwell or elderly, and you're only going to have a limited amount of time. And so within the framework that we will discuss, you'll see you can always do more, do less, etc. Now, there is one advantage that people davening at home have over everyone else this year. What's that? You can sing. At Shuls now, we are going to be very, very limited in what we can sing in order to control the spread of the virus. And so there are serious limitations on singing in the community. And so we're allowing the chazan to sing. In my shul, the chazan is behind sort of perspex screens on four sides, so he is shielded from the rest of the community. But the rest of us, we're told we can hum along, etc., but not really sing. And so that's very difficult. And it's often the tunes that lift us on Rosh Hashanah. If you're at home, you can sing and go for it. Sing as much as you can. Now, let me just share with you this anecdote. I was talking to one of my members in Shul last night, and I said, you can daven in English. You don't have to daven in Hebrew. He said, he said, Rabbi, if I daven in English, it takes me a lot longer because I'm understanding what I'm saying. Well, that really is the key. It's no point in just rushing through the words and not comprehending what you're saying. You really need to understand those words. And let's just take ourselves back to basics, as it were. Just look very briefly at the history of prayer and the machzor, and to understand how we've got to where we are. Now, there is a basic biblical command, according to the Rambam, to pray every day. And our prayer should have three components. There's an element of praise to God, there's an element of request, and there's an element of thanks. So those are the three, as it were, primal dimensions of prayer. And they correspond to sort of very natural reactions that we might have. So imagine you're walking to the top of a mountain, and you get to the summit and you see that amazing vista in front of you. And you think, how wonderful is your creation, O God? There's a sense of praise of seeing that tremendous vista around there before you as you look down. Another scenario could be is that you're a little distance away and you see a kid about to run into the road. You say, please God, don't let that happen. And you see someone rush forward and grab the kid and schlep him out just before the car goes past. Thank you, God. Baruch Hashem, thank God. And so there is the notion of praise. There's the request, please God, don't let it happen. And thank you, thank God. So praise, request, and thanks are three, as it were, primal dimensions of our prayerful needs. That when we pray, it should have those three components. And our Amida, our daily prayer, is structured in that way. The first section is praise to God. The last section is thanks to God. And the central section, where we say every weekday, are our needs of the requests we ask for, whether it's for good health, whether it's for wisdom, whether it's peace, whether it's for justice, and so on. that central section when it comes to Shabbos and Yom Tov is replaced by a request to God for blessings for that particular day, and so on. And so on Rosh Hashanah, and of course Yom Kippur, that central section is dealing with the nature of that day. Now, the original form of prayer was just what a person wanted to do. You read in the Bible how Abraham prays for the people of Sodom, how he prays for how Isaac and Rebekah pray for a child, how we find that Hannah, we mentions it in the Torah reading, the Haftarah reading Rosh Hashanah, she prays for a child. How Moses prays that his sister Miriam should be have a refuah shalem, should be healed. And so we just see how our ancestors in the Bible pray in a spontaneous way. And originally prayer was that. It was spontaneous, what you needed to do, you said it, and everyone prayed, but it was something that they felt intuitively they knew how to do. When the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians and our ancestors were exiled away, then they lost an ability to pray in that very fluent manner. It was both a crisis of language and a crisis of faith. That they, not being exiled into Babylon, they lost that fluency to be able to communicate with God in that instinctive way. And of course, the theological crisis of the destruction of the temple challenged them in their ability to be able to express themselves to a God where they've been punished by having their temple taken away. And so when the Jews returned to the land of Israel, the beginning of the Second Temple period, we find the beginnings of a more structured prayer framework that set out for the Jewish people, for the Jewish community, in order to address this situation. And so we find the beginnings of what we call formalized communal obligatory prayer, where there's a prayer structure that we have to engage in on a daily basis. Otherwise, people will just lose the ability to be able to pray. And so we find our ancestors of that period begin to set down the structure of a prayer, which develops in the course of the Second Temple period, culminating in the form that we have it more or less today, where you have an Amidah that's there structured, set out for us to be able to daven. And that is to be daven communally, ideally with a minyan. The prayers are said in a plural form. We're not just praying for me individually, we're praying for all of us. We say in the prayers, forgive us, heal us, bless us for a good year. They're done in the plural rather than the personal. And they're to be there in a structured form to be expressed to say every day. Because if we didn't have that, then people sometimes wouldn't bother. And so we are, as it were, activating our prayer muscles on a regular basis. And that basic structure of prayer was there, and we find that developed in the period of the Talmud as well. After that, of course, you have poetic creativity that's taking place all the time. There were, King David writes these beautiful psalms, many of which are included in our Siddur, in our prayer books. And there were other great works of poetry and composition that were taking place. I mean, there's a book in the Apocrypha called Ben Sirach, where he has some very fine proverbs, like you find in the book of Proverbs. And he also has a description of the high priest who leaves the Holy of Holies of the temple on Yom Kippur. And it's clear that the prayer that we have on Yom Kippur, called Mari Cohen, has been inspired by that particular passage. And so people were composing their own prayers that inspired others as well. And there were mystical compositions that date from this period. And then you had Paitanim, poets of Jewish prayer that lived from about the 4th century onwards, who were composing great works of poetry in order to embellish the services. You had, people felt inspired, they wanted to add to the services in various ways. You have people like Yanai and Kalir, who live in the land of Israel in the 6th and 7th century, who start to compose poetry to elaborate and embroider the prayer services. And they just felt they wanted to add things to the prayers that were there. Now, of course, at the beginning, this was very controversial. I mean, if you've got the Amidah. You can't really add things to it. And so at the beginning, there was a reluctance to add these prayers, but eventually they became accepted as part of the service. In fact, it was the Chazan who was saying it all. In the early years, there weren't any prayer books. Prayer books only start to be written down from about the 8th, 9th century onwards. Prior to that, everyone prayed, but they prayed off by heart. You know, you got to learn the basic prayers at an early age off by heart. But the more complex ones, you just listen to the Chazan, and he did it for you. And you listened, you said Amen, etc. And all the prayers were being said by the Chazan. And especially when it came to more complicated places like Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with longer prayer services, it was so important to listen to the Chazan because he was there doing it for you. But when you had these embellishments in poetic additions to the service, these were being done, and you would listen to what the Chazan was saying, and they were it was very beautiful. It was very a beautiful embellishment that people would listen. And of course, there was an audience that understood what was being said. But these were extras that were added to the service. When they were doing so, it's important that people would realize that this was an authorized addition, rather than just something someone made up and you can't really rely on it. And so they started to have, that before you had these additions to the service, they would have something that was called a reshus. I'm asking permission for the community that what I'm about to say is appropriate. And so you have these phrases, misod chachamim unavonim, that people should realize that the additions that are now being put into the service have the full authority of the rabbis. And so you find this sort of phrase at the beginning of the repetition of the Amidah after the end of the first paragraph, so that the additions that the Chazan is going to make is there. And so you have these various, as it were, poetic additions to the service that are taking place, especially in the repetition of the Amidah that's there on Rosh Hashanah and, of course, Yom Kippur as well. Now, if we're davening by ourselves at home, there are things, of course, that we can't say. You can't say those prayers that require a minyan. And so, unfortunately, if those people are saying Kaddish, you can't say Kaddish without a minyan. And there are those things you don't need to say if you're not in synagogue with a minyan. And so the these poetic additions that are there in the repetition of the Amidah, there's no requirement for them to be said if you're davening by yourself. And so you've got some very nice poetic compositions. For example, Unasana Tokef, the dramatic description of the divine courtroom drama, as it were, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's a poetic addition to the service, which an individual davening by themselves really has no requirement to say. The core requirements that we have are there of the daily service that are there in terms of the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah. And I would suggest that everyone should start off with the core requirements. Start off the day by saying Modeh Ani. I give my thanks to God. You've given me back my life every day. Elokai Neshama, the soul that you've given to me is pure. You've restored it to me. Those things. I see my cousin Ruthie, who's on this Zoom as well. I remember our grandmother, when my father used to tell me that you would ask her, "How old are you?" She'd always say, "I'm 1 day old." 1 day old? Well, God gave me back my life when I woke up this morning, so I'm just 1 day old. And to thank God for every day, that's a prayer that we express in Elokai Neshama. And we have beautiful morning blessings that are part of our daily service that we say every day. Now, our regular daily service has verses of praise where we express our praise to God with verses from the book of Psalms. And then there's the Shema and its blessings. A person should say the Shema every day. It's a mitzvah to say the Shema both in the morning, in the Shacharis prayer, in the Ma'ariv, in the evening prayer. And when we say the Shema, we're expressing our faith in one God, and to love God with all our heart, with our soul, and all our might, and to speak about the Torah wherever we may be. And in the subsequent paragraphs and afterwards, we recall the Exodus from Egypt, we recall the crossing of the Red Sea, and we come to praise God in the Amidah. Now, when we daven the Amidah on a daily basis, we've got the standard formula, but on Rosh Hashanah, things are changed to a bit. And one key phrase where you find a change is the emphasis on the word melech, God as king. I recall that I started davening as a shaliach tzibor as a youngster. I was 17 years old when I did my first service, and I was, I think it was the third overflow of the Ilford synagogue. In those days, Ilford was the largest community in Europe, and I'd auditioned to be the Baal Shachris in the third overflow. And I was being interviewed by the senior chazan of the community, the late Reverend Skaletsky. And he said to me, young man, when you say these prayers and you come to the word melech, give it all you've got. You're expressing God's sovereignty at this particular time. And those words had an impact. I try my best that when I'm engaging that melech al kol ha'oretz, that you're saying those words to realize this is what we're emphasizing. And this is a key idea of Rosh Hashanah in our prayers, whether we're davening at home or in Shul, to realize the notion of melech, God's sovereignty. When our forebears were formulating these prayers, the notion of melech, of king, meant something very, very different than what it does today. You know, the story in Fiddler on the Roof, what's the blessing for the Tsar? May the God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. For so much of our history, a human king or ruler was someone who was powerful, who was capricious, that you could bribe, they had their favorites, and you couldn't trust them. You never knew what was going to happen with that king. You know, off with his head. It could be anything like that. And we're stressing that the King of Kings, our King, our Sovereign, our Kodesh Baruch Hu, is so different to the human king. Indeed, there is a poem that's there as part of our Rosh Hashanah service that really has been truncated. If you got the Koromas, you'll see at the back the full original version, Melech Elyon, Melech Evyon. There is the celestial king, and then there's the terrestrial king. And the qualities, of course, are so different. These kings in olden times had their favorites. They could take a dislike to you. They could persecute you, and they destroyed our temple. And they frequently prevented us from keeping our religion properly. But on Rosh Hashanah, we reframe. We recognize who is really in charge, the true Melech, the true king, who is all powerful, but is close to us. He's concerned with the universe as a whole, but he's also concerned about little me. And this is the Melech that we engage with on Rosh Hashanah, and we are crowning as our king. But even though it's just little me and little you who are davening on Rosh Hashanah, you shouldn't think, even if you're davening at home, your own role is insignificant. In the normal Amida, after you get after Atah Kadosh, you say Baruch Atah Hashem, Hakel HaKadosh. And here, before we get to the end of that blessing, we have 3 paragraphs to begin with the words Uvachein. Uvachein tein pachtacha, and so grant your or. Uvachein tein kavod, and grant your honor. Uvachein tzedekah, and so for the righteous. And this word Uvachein has a particular resonance. Let me explain. There is a passage, it resonates to a phrase in the book of Esther. You know the story of Esther, how she is taken as a queen in the palace, and no one knows her origins. And then eventually there is this decree against the Jewish people. Her cousin Mordechai wants her to be able to appeal to the king. She's very apprehensive. How can I do so? I've not been called for all this time. And Mordechai says, you have to do so. If not, then some salvation will come from other place, and you won't be part of it. And so she agrees. She says, well, get all the Jews to pray, and I and my maidens will do so, pray for 3 days. And she says, Uvachein ovo el hamelech. And she says, and so I will go to the king. And whatever will be, will be. What the praise we say on prayers on Rosh Hashanah are saying are evoking this idea. Uvachein ovo el hamelech. When we say the words Uvachein, we are reminding ourselves that we are about to go to the king, and it could depend on you. It could be your prayer that will just tip the balance on behalf of not just of yourself, but the whole of the Jewish community, and indeed the whole world. That every person's prayer counts. There is a that you can bring in your prayers that can have unbelievable consequences. The poems and the repetition, you don't need to say them if you're davening by yourself, but you might want to read them and you'd be inspired by them. Similarly, when it comes to the laning, since we're not in Shul, there's no need to have laning. However, you might want to, and I would encourage you to read through the Torah reading for the days of Rosh Hashanah. On the Torah reading for the first day, you've got the how Abraham prays first on behalf of how Abraham and Sarah are blessed with a child. In fact, the previous passage has been that Abraham has prayed on behalf of Avimelech, and as a result of that, not only is Avimelech answered and his family are healed, but also Abraham and Sarah are blessed with a child. And for which you have the important rule that you should pray. If you need something, pray for someone else. And if you pray for someone else, then God will answer the prayers for you as well. Don't just be personal and selfish about your prayer. Pray for other people. And that's so important to do. Occasionally, my wife links up to people. She knows one person, two people that have particular needs, that you daven for so-and-so, and the other person will daven for you. And that sort of linkage in prayers can be very powerful. And we also see in the latest day of Rosh Hashanah how Ishmael is saved. You know, Abraham sends away Hagar and Ishmael, and then they run out of water, and Ishmael is dying of thirst, and we find that nevertheless that prayer is answered. And the commentaries point out that isn't Ishmael going to have descendants that will be so terrible to the Jewish people? But at that moment in time, Ishmael is around. And the important, powerful lesson is that God will look at us on Rosh Hashanah, how we are at that particular point. It may well be we'll make, as it were, commitments and resolutions on Rosh Hashanah, which we will be able to carry forward. Nevertheless, B'asher Usham, if we are sincere about what we're doing, wherever we're praying, we're at home or at Shul, God will look upon that favorably. And so that's the important thing to bear in mind, that we are B'asher Usham, we are there, our particular prayers on Rosh Hashanah, and God should answer our prayers. And in the Haftarah for the first day, of course, you have the prayers of Hannah, for whom we learn so much about the laws of prayer. And she is seen to be, for us, a role model of prayer in the way that she conducted herself. And I think it's so inspiring that we're not so, as it were, focusing just on men, but we find that women's prayers throughout the Rosh Hashanah services are seen to be so powerful and significant, and are, as it were, the models for us to be able to pray. Although we're at home, I would encourage you to say a prayer that's normally only said in Shul, but I think everyone should say it. I was saying it during lockdown on every Shabbos. That's the prayer for the Queen and the prayer for the state of Israel. Our country needs our prayers. And so you should daven that the Queen and the government should be able to have wisdom and make the best and right decisions for us and for our country. And of course, Israel needs our prayers. Israel is suffering now under lockdown, under coronavirus, much more than we would have had expected at this stage, having so good right at the beginning. And so do say prayers for the Queen and the country, and prayers for the state of Israel as well. I will just express perhaps another brief idea, and perhaps use the remainder of my time for your questions. In the Musaf Amida, we've got verses of sovereignty, we've got verses of remembrance, and verses of shafarot. One of those verses of remembrance refers to Noah in the flood, and it says that God remembered Noah. There is a very interesting comparison with Noah's situation and ours. Noah is in lockdown. He's stuck inside his ark during that particular time. You can imagine how frustrating it must have been to be stuck there. And eventually, the flood abates, and Noah is looking to see, can I get out of this place? And he sends out the birds, he sends out first the raven, and then the dove, and eventually he's able to get out. And, you can remember the sense of release we all had when we started to get out, right, a few weeks back at the beginning when the lockdown was beginning to ease. And Noah gets out, he's grateful, he offers sacrifices to God, he sees the rainbow and so on. But then Noah loses it. He plants a vineyard, he gets drunk, he overindulges himself, and we see powerful lessons there, perhaps that are relevant to our situation, that when you do have a release of the previous constraints that are upon you, do recognize the responsibilities that are upon us and don't go too far. And so we look to be able to ease our lockdown and not have to be to suffering it with it too much, but recognize the lessons that we do learn from Noah. Now, friends, previous years, you may well have been a passenger in following prayers, Shul, and so on. This year, God is handing you the car keys. Although you can't drive on Yom Tov, but nevertheless, you're, as it were, a driver that you can do it for yourself. You can. And don't think if I'm stuck at home, I've not got a role to play. You can. Your prayers can be as important as any person's prayers in the Jewish world, and they may be the key prayers. So please, try and prepare yourself. Look, use those opportunities, and let's try and all of us do it in the best way we can. If I can just share with you a brief acrostic, the word prayer is spelled P-R-A-Y-E-R. P stands for preparation. You want to make it work? Prepare yourself. Just open the mouth on the day. Do some preparation. R stands for reach out. We're praying to God. We're reaching up to heaven. A stands for atmosphere or ambience. Make sure the environment in which you find yourself is going to be conducive to prayer. Y stands for yearning. You're going to be sincere in asking of God to be able to hearken and listen to our prayers. E stands for everything. God is able to do anything and everything. And R stands for result, question mark. We don't know how God will answer our prayers, what God deems to be good for us, and whether we see it in that way as well. So, but every prayer is heard. We may not see the results in the way that we want and demand, but God knows what is best for us and will answer our prayers in the right way and the best way. Bless you all, and we should all have a Ketiva v'Chetima Tova inscribed and sealed for a good and sweet year, and may this year indeed bring us sweetness. Thank you, and I'm happy to deal with any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dayan Binstock. Thank you. So back and just so the best way to ask a question is to raise your hand in the chat in the participants function. If you raise it on screen and you've screen shared, I'll also be able to see it. So if you have any questions for Dayan, I'm just going to start with the ones that have come through so far. Someone from the choir wants to know, so at the moment the regulations are that they have to be at least 3 meters apart. Is there any easing of terms if it will enhance the ruach for choirs?
Right. So what we set up, I can only tell you in St. John's Wood Shul, is perspex screens. So our choristers are going to be a little uncomfortable, but they'll be in perspex cubicles. So with the perspex around them, then you can relax the 3 meter rule to a degree. So just look at the configuration of where you're doing it. If you just expand on some perspex, then you may be able to find that more straightforward.
Great, thank you. And the email for the note somebody's asked about, so is that just from Koren? You said about just email.
Yes.
Koren.
So I will send you that email, Rabbi Fegelman, and you can forward it to whoever needs it.
Thank you. So we have a hand up here from it's Benjamin Huglin. Looks like Victor Huglin to me. So,
okay.
I just get to unmute Victor.
Well, first say hi to Victor and wish him long life and the recent passing of his very dear wife, whom we knew and had so much affection for the whole family. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Right. First, I want to wish you and Rachel and all the family Shana Tova, should only be well. And thank you for all your kindness many years ago in St. John's Wood, which we'll always remember. My question is as follows. You've emphasized Hamelech HaKadosh, that these particular days, the emphasis is on Hamelech all the time, the majesty and the kingship of the Almighty.
Yeah.
Why don't we say it during the rest of the year? Rest of the year, is the Almighty no longer the king?
Of course.
Why do we?
Okay. Of course he is. And we do refer to the word melech many times in our melech, Oseh, Mashiach, again, melech, Stock, or Mishpat, etc. He's there. But it's when our lives are in the balance on Rosh Hashanah, when you may think that, who's in charge? Is it Vladimir Putin? Is it Boris Johnson? Is it Donald Trump, wherever you may be living in this world? And you may be thinking that it is the forces around me, particularly those leaders who are in charge of my lives. That's when you need to remind yourself of the ultimate Melech. And, that's why we're stressing at this time of Yom Hadin, when our lives are about, that it is that, of course, you have to live your lives in this world. But realize where true sovereignty lies, and recognize that it is towards the Almighty that is where the judgment will come from, and He is the one who is in charge. So it's because it's this particular time we need to recognize that's God and stress the multitudes of God. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? People are welcome to put their hand up on screen, and I can unmute them. No. So I think, yes, we have one from Ruth Raisman. I'll just unmute you here. Okay. 1 second. Yes, Ruth, please go ahead.
Hello, Cousin Ivan.
Hi, Cousin Ruthie.
Happy New Year to everybody and all the family. It's just about shofar blowing.
Yes.
Because that is permitted, I presume, behind a screen.
It is. Yeah.
You have so many notes, aren't you, throughout the service?
Yeah.
According to our Shul, it's going to be just blown once, curtailed.
Okay.
I think they're just going to have the long session immediately after learning.
Yes. Okay. That's fine. The 30 notes is the basic requirement, and that's fine. If we need to curtail the service, that's what we would do. If there is an opportunity later on to blow more and there is time, then one can do so. But 30 is a minimum requirement, and the idea of doing 100 is only a later development. If you look in the old Routledge Machzor, it doesn't mention anywhere about 100. Yeah. And so that was under the influence of the Shul, and developed in Eastern Europe, and now has become a very widespread practice. But some communities, like the Dutch community, don't blow 100 notes. And so, so if under these particular circumstances we can only blow 30, that's fine. I would also say, though, if you're at home, it's not so difficult to blow the shofar. Yeah, I know there's only a few days, but if you want to go out and buy a shofar and practice, I would reckon it's not too difficult for a person, man or woman, to blow the shofar for themselves. And there are enough teach yourself videos online that you can actually learn to do it. To do the basic 30 notes, it's something that most people can learn to do for themselves. So I throw that out as a challenge for those who are going to be stuck at home and may not have access to hearing a shofar on the second day. All right?
For a woman as well?
Yes, a woman can blow for herself, sure. Yeah.
Fine, thank you.
Excellent.
Now, Ruthie, I know you play the piano. Do you play the trumpet?
No, my son Ian used to play the trumpet.
All right.
Yeah, actually, yes. Well, I'll get him to blow. I've got a little tiny shofar.
Right. Good. So you got your work cut out then the next few days.
Okay.
So, yeah, just as an opportunity, Dayan, for us to remind the community, we're going to be having shofar blowings across Liverpool. From what you should be getting details, you should have had details ready through your shuls. The idea is that nobody will have to walk more than 10 minutes from this side of the community. So please, if you need more details on that, I'm very happy to help you with that. Do we have any further questions? I know Dayan's not got a long amount of time. I have a question here just on the chat. If one's davening at home, is there any part of the tefillah one is not allowed to say?
Well, as I've said, the parts that require a minyan. So you can't say the Kedusha, okay, because that requires a minyan. You can't, you can't say that the blessings over a Sefer Torah. Because that requires a minyan, the Kaddish requires a minyan. But so read the laning, that you can do. Okay, you can read the Haftorah. You can't say the blessings on the Haftorah without a minyan. In the repetition of the Musaf Amida, we have the Oleinu, where we open the ark and we fall down. That you wouldn't do by yourself. That's only in the repetition of an Amida. But much of the other prayers you can say, that as I say, that when you'll see in the Maghzeh will say quite clearly the following should be said only in the presence of a minyan.
Thank you.
If anyone has any particular queries, by all means, be in touch and I'll deal with that specifically.
Right. And just quickly back to the subject of choirs. If the choir are wearing visors, would that be sufficient, or that has to be perspex screens?
I'm not an expert in these regulations. I think if you can, the Joe Gross, head office United Synagogues, has put down some guidelines for the United Synagogue. I can send them to you, Rabbi Feigerman, which may be of assistance if this is a particular specific query that you would want to know what is the US doing.
Thank you for that. Just a question here come up on the chat. Can we say Yizka on Yom Kippur, someone on their own at home?
Yes. It's perfectly in order to say Yizka by yourself, even
Right.
if you're not in Shul. I mean, some shuls, mine included, are doing a Yizka on Erev Yom Kippur. I did one, a Yizka before Pesach and before Shavuos, before the last days of Pesach and before Shavuos, and we did it on Zoom. And I'll do a Yizka before Yom Kippur again on Zoom. But on Yom Kippur itself, it's perfectly in order to say Yizka by yourself.
Thank you very much. I think we are out of time. I just want to finish by thanking the Dayan.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate, firstly, the share and you being available to take our questions. Just on a personal note, I've very often contacted the Dayan, especially recently. Thank you very much for giving your time and your guidance and expertise. And therefore, really, it's something we should all thank you for, because, of course, that then has its ripple effect through to the community. So thank you very much. Wish you, on behalf of all of us, Shana Tova Masukah.
Thank you.
Sima Tova, for you and all your family and your community. And we are very, very appreciative. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. All the best.
All the best. Thank you. And we thank everyone for joining us tonight. This is the first in 4 consecutive nights of communal programming. And tomorrow night, you can still register your interest with Rebbitzin Lent if you'd like to take part in the Kukavir demonstration. That is all on the notice. We can again send that out to anyone who's not yet who wants to make contact. And look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday, where we'll have a share from Rabbi Shochet of Mill Hill, and on Wednesday from Rabbi Chitrik of Turkey. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon. If you haven't yet signed up for Shachris in Allerton tomorrow at 7:45, please do so. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.